Hey all, it's Matt, your average gamer, and for this video we're going to be covering the Elden Ring PvE meta, the best weapons, the best builds, highlighting several of them and going over each one, and we're going to be showing you how to make a build in Elden Ring with some information that can help you make overpowered builds. We have faith builds, we have bleed builds, we've got a ton of stuff in this video, dexterity builds, awesome builds that do a lot of damage and have a lot of firepower, and explaining how they work and why they're good, while also going over and detailing the best talismans, buffs, and everything you need to know. It's definitely one of the most detailed videos, especially for builds that I've done for Elden Ring, so be sure to sit back, take some notes if need be, and you're going to learn a lot over the course of this video. You're going to be able to craft some builds once you get to know everything and all the information here, and also you'll get to know some of the best builds in the game too. This is both the PvE meta explained as well as how to craft and make builds in Elden Ring, at least in its simplest form. We're going to go over all of that in details. This is just a little bit of an intro here with some cool builds. We're going to highlight different ones throughout the video. Yeah, hopefully you learned something from this video. Hopefully I'm able to share information that I have and stuff I've memorized from over 1,000 hours of playing Elden Ring, my favorite game of all time, no question. We're going to start off here, by the way, with bleed builds. And bleed builds are top choices. Jump attack bleed builds can proc bleed fast. Any jumps that hit 4 times make for quick bleed buildup. Twin blades and curved swords are awesome. Magwyn's Sacred Spear is another overly OP option. For talismans, almost all of them are the same for the most part. Rottenwing Sword Insignia, Melissen's Prosthesis, Lord of Blood's Exaltation, the Claw Talisman, and then you're going to use the Raptor's Black Feathers and the White Mask as well. Those are 2 pieces of armor that can increase your damage on the jump attack bleed builds, and for the best buffs you're going to use Flame Grant Me Strength and the Golden Vow Ash of War or Commander's Standard because they have low faith requirements which make them good for this. And the featured build here is the Scavenger Curved Swords. I love the Scavenger Curved Swords. They've been fantastic since launch time. You can put them in Occult Affinity and then only have to worry really about 1 damage stat and give yourself a good amount of Vigor and Endurance as well, and absolutely destroy bosses with the amount of bleed buildup and the damage in between procs. Let's jump into equipment for this one. For equipment, we have 2 Scavenger Curved Swords in Occult Affinity with Seppuku. We're using the Dragon Communion Seal because it scales with Arcane, so why not? White Mask, Raptor's Black Feathers, Claw Talisman, Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Rottenwing Sword Insignia, Melissen's Prosthesis, Faith Tier, Thorny Tier, and then the stats are on the right if you need them. And next up is Strength builds. The Giant Crusher and Guts Greatsword are Strength's best. Popular Ashes of War are Giant Hut, Lion's Claw, Earthshaker, and Royal Knight's Resolve. Lion's Claw is one of the most reliable Ashes of War in the game, and Strength builds have seen their posture damage go down throughout patches. If you have a high AR weapon like the Giant Crusher, Axe Talisman and Charge Tier combo perfectly. Roar Medallion and Highland Axe passive are great for roars. Shard of Alexander is a lock for powerful Ashes of War like Lion's Claw. Ritual Swords Talisman can be used for generic damage, and Flame Grant Me Strength and Golden Vow Ash of War Commander Standard are best because they have low faith requirements. And the featured build for this one, you guessed it, is Guts Greatsword and Lion's Claw. One of my favorite combinations in the game because it does a ridiculous amount of damage while also doing a fairly good amount of posture damage too. It's everything you want in a strength build. I have an early game Guts Greatsword guide for Lion's Claw. If you want to check that out too, I'll add that to the description below. It can carry you from the beginning of the game all the way into the end game. You can even put it in Fire Affinity if you want to. Also, between that and Heavy Affinity, you've got a lot of options between elemental and physical damage and just the pure posture damage it does. It's great. Let's jump into equipment. And we have Guts Greatsword and Heavy Affinity with Lion's Claw. Any seal will do. Random set of armor on here. Erdtree's Favorite +2. Ritual Shield Talisman. Shard of Alexander. Ritual Swords Talisman. The Posture Breaking Tier. Faith Tier. Let's jump into stats. And we have 60 Vigor. When we're two-handing, we're getting 90 Strength, and we're able to buff with High Faith. That last part's not mandatory. You can do the regular buffs. And for Faith builds here, now that we're talking about Faith, they can allow you to do Fire damage, Holy damage, and Lightning damage. Faith has awesome options for weapons like the Blasphemous Blade and Sacred Relic Sword. Ancient Dragon Lightning Strike is the common Azura of Faith builds. Godslayer's Greatsword has fallen from grace in recent patches with low poise. And Faith weapons can be boosted by the Shard of Alexander, Ritual Swords Talisman, and Elemental Scorpion Charm. Faith casters can use Phlox Canvas Talisman and Godfrey Icon for chargeable incantations. You have a lot of buffs at your disposal, but you can use Hellish Brewery for the most part and Golden Vow. And one of the 2 most obvious featured builds on this list, we're going to be talking about the Blasphemous Blade. Of course, we have a good build for that too. It's one of the most powerful weapons in the game. It can heal you, it does a ton of fire damage, and its Ash of War scales purely with your Fate stat. All the footage, by the way, on every single one of these builds, these are clips from different videos that I've made throughout the channel, just featuring different ones. More meta stuff, obviously, with Blasphemous Blade and later Darkmoon Greatsword and all that. But they're all on New Game Plus 7, of course, because I'm playing on New Game Plus 7 for the most part now, meaning all bosses have the maximum amount of HP they're going to get, and they do the maximum amount of damage, too. Which makes the Blasphemous Blade one of the best weapons for New Game Plus and beyond as well. It's also great for co-op because you can continue to heal yourself. Overall, it's just really reliable. This is a weapon that once you use, you're going to find it's very much the easy mode of Elden Ring, much like playing as a mage. It's just so simple to use the Ash of War, heal, and get in a ton of damage. It's also one of my favorite weapons in the entire game too. Because of the fact that the Ash of War Taker's Flame scales entirely with your Fate stat, you can combo it with fire incantations or any other incantations you like, because you're going to heavily invest in Faith if you're mainly using that incredibly powerful Ash of War. Start using the Blasphemous Blade and odds are you're not going to put it down for a long time, and when you finally do put it down, you'll probably end up getting bored because it's that good. Let's jump into equipment. Equipment, we have Blasphemous Blade plus 10, any seal will do. I was using the Giant Seal for fire incantations, Dragoncrest Great Shield Talisman, Fire Scorpion Charm, Shard of Alexander, Ritual Swords Talisman, Fire Tier, Fate Tier, stats are on the right. Next up is Dexterity. Double Slash on a Keen Nagakiba or starting katana is fantastic. This combo is now better than the Rivers of Blood, which has been nerfed somewhere between 3 and 5 times. Impaling Thrust and Swords Dance are two other great options. Dexterity is all about quick damage, and Bloodflame Blade is awesome with this. Bolt of Grandsax is a strong Somber Dex weapon. Rottenwing Sword Insignia, Millicent's Prosthesis, and Shard of Alexander, even Lord of Blood's Exaltation can be excellent for Dex builds. Thorny Tear is great as well, and buffs like Flame Grant Me Strength and Golden Vow Ash of War are excellent. Bloodflame Blade, as mentioned, works really well with Innate Bleed, and White Mask can be added. And the featured build for this one is a Keen Nagakiba with Double Slash, of course, and Bloodflame Blade, where you can get Bleed build up and also have a powerful Keen option for a Dexterity build. And I know everything doesn't need to be turned into a bleed build, but in this case it does make it a lot better. You could run a lot of pure dex builds that are powerful too, but if you add Bloodflame Blade on something like the Nagakiba or starting katana, you end up with a better version of the Rivers of Blood, which was an awesome weapon at launch. Let's jump into equipment. For equipment, we have a Keen Nagakiba or starting katana with Bloodflame Blade and Double Slash. Any seal will do. We have the White Mask, Dragoncrest Great Shield Talisman, Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Rottenwing Sword Insignia, Shard of Alexander, Thorny Tier, Faith Tier, and then for stats, we have a lot of Dexterity and 60 Vigor. And next up here is Mages and Battle Mages, which are incredibly OP. Darkmoon is super reliable and low FP. Deathspoker has a very high damage cap. Comet Azure and Night Comet can vanish bosses in seconds. Ice Spear is a sleeper build that is really powerful. Spellblade set can boost all magic Ashes of War. For a pure mage, Graven Skull Talisman, Graven Mask Talisman, Ritual Swords Talisman, and Godfrey Icon for chargeable spells. Jellyfish Shield is great and works with Darkmoon too. Weapons, Magic Scorpion Charm, Shard of Alexander, Ritual Swords Talisman, and Godfrey Icon for Darkmoon. Terra Magica can boost your damage by 35%, and Faith buffs can make mages even more OP, but you can run the Golden Vow Ash of War and Terra Magica. That was a lot of info on that one. Anyways, for the featured build on this one, it's the Darkmoon Greatsword, of course, a staple for the Dark Souls series and the Moonlight Greatsword, and then turning it into the Darkmoon Greatsword in Elden Ring, still making for a fantastic intelligence weapon. The best thing about the Darkmoon Greatsword, there's a lot of things to like. The Ash of War scales purely with your intelligence stat, the posture damage is great, but it's so low FP that it is just awesome how much you don't need to invest in FP to use the Darkmoon Greatsword. You can get a lot out of it. Let's jump into equipment. This is the only one on here at 200, but I have 150 stats. We have the Darkmoon Greatsword plus 10, Jellyfish Shield, any seal. Spellblade set will boost this, Shard of Alexander, Ritual Swords Talisman, Magic Scorpion Charm, Godfrey Icon because it is chargeable. We have the Crimson Burst Crystal Tier, Magic Tier. Let's jump into the 150 stat. And for the 150 stats, I was using some Faith buffs. We have 60 Intelligence, 50 Vigor, 28 Mind, 22 Endurance. Other great options are Quality, which can be good, and Bloodhound's Fang is still a popular choice. Faith and Arcane can be OP with Dragon Incantations and Occult Weapons. Faith and Intelligence is still lacking, but the Sword of Night and Flame is still good, just not launch good. Stormblade is great on a Dexterity or Quality build. What is OP? Well, Mage builds are, Bleed builds are, Faith builds are, Dexterity builds are, Bonk Strength builds are, and anything that can really stack damage that you can buff a lot that has high AR or has a lot of damage or a high damage cap. We'll go over more details on talismans and buffs shortly here. For the featured build on this one, since we're talking about quality builds, it's going to be Bloodhound's Fang. Bloodhound's Fang is known for the fact that you can add Greases or Blood Flame Blade to it to get even more bleed damage, and then it has the Ash of War that has basically the iframes in it and whatnot, the invincibility frames, so you can avoid a bunch of attacks too. It's quite powerful. Let's jump into equipment. For equipment, we have Bloodhound's Fang, preferably plus 10. Any seal will do. We had the Knight's Cavalry set on altered. I believe just the helm was altered. Shard of Alexander, Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Ritual Swords Talisman, Dragoncrest Great Shield Talisman, Thorny Tier, Faith Tier. Let's talk about the quality stats for this one. And for the quality stats here, we have 35 strength, but that's going to get us to around 52 strength. And then for dexterity, we have 55 dexterity, 60 vigor, and 20 mind. Now on to explaining buffs. You can have one body and one aura buff. Good aura buffs are Golden Vow and Commander Standard. Body buffs are Hellish Fury, Flame Grant Me Strength, and Blood Boil, although the last is hard to farm, get on console. Stack one body and one aura buff for great damage. And how each buff works, Golden Vow Incantation adds 15% more damage, Commander Standard 20%, but the former lasts twice as long. Flame Grant Me Strength adds 20% fire and physical damage for 30 seconds. Hal is 25% generic damage for 40 seconds. Blood Boil is 30% physical for around a minute, but again, that one is a little bit hard to farm for, and the items for it are limited. A buff example and featured build is we use Golden Vow here in Hellish Fury, and we're going to show off the Envoy's Longhorn, I always say that the wrong way, but yeah, Envoy's Longhorn here, incredibly powerful when buffed. Hellish Fury and Golden Vow will add a total of 40% more damage, and as you can see, the dragon absolutely vanished, disappeared, and got destroyed by bubbles. Let's jump into equipment for this awesome build for the Envoy's Longhorn. Super powerful and overpowered build option for you here. We're going to jump into equipment for this cool build. And we have the Envoy's Longhorn plus 10. We have the Erdtree Seal because it's great for faith scaling. We're using the Envoy's Crown for the extra damage. Phlox Canvas Talisman, Sacred Scorpion Charm, Ritual Swords Talisman, Shard of Alexander. And then we have the Holy Tier and Faith Tier. Let's talk about stats for this one. So before the fight, we use Golden Vow because it has a longer duration, right? It's going to last over a minute, and then Hellish Fury is only 40 seconds. So we combine those two for added damage, and then we have 60 Vigor. We hit 80 Faith with the Faith tier. The Ash of War will scale like the Blasphemous Blade entirely with your Faith stat. We have 23 Mind and 27 Endurance. Explaining the best talismans. The Shard of Alexander is the best talisman in my opinion in the entire game, boosting weapon arts by 15%. Ritual Swords Talisman is a generic full HP damage option for most builds. Lord of Blood's Exaltation and Kindred of Rot's Exaltation are fantastic with 20% damage. Godfrey Icon is 15% more when you're using something chargeable. Scorpion Charms are a great option for 12% more elemental damage. Rottenwing Sword Insignia and Millicent's Prosthesis can be stacked for fast builds. Erdtree's Favor plus 2 is great for strength builds, increasing equipment load, stamina, and HP, and I have a sheet here explaining how I use talismans that I will show you as well. This is the sheet that I posted around March or April of last year, and it might be a little bit small if you're looking at it on the phone. The copy I had was a screenshot. Couldn't find the original copy, but this is basically what I have memorized now. I'm going to post this on my community tab as well so you can save it. And before we get to the ending and talk about some final stuff here, I want to show off one more build, and that's Ice Spear, which is really a sleeper build. It's incredibly powerful. It scales with both Dexterity and Magic, so you can use it in Cold Affinity for fantastic damage, very good damage, as well as your regular Keen Affinity on the Guardian Sword Spear, and it'll run off AR too, so you're going to get a lot of damage out of it that way also. Yeah, it truly is great. It's something you definitely want to try out, whether you're running a Dexterity build, and having that option, by the way, to switch to basically magic damage on a Dexterity build is really powerful. And then if you want to run it on Cold Affinity too, or Magic Affinity, you can get a lot of damage out of it that way too. It really makes for a versatile build that you can add to a lot of things, and I was very impressed with the fact that it does scale with Dexterity, also giving you that benefit when you're running something like the Guardian Sword Spear and Keen Affinity, which gets absurd damage in Keen Affinity. Yeah, the Guardian Sword Spear and Keen Affinity is amazing. The base damage gives it what essentially amounts to S scaling. It's A scaling, but because the base damage is so good on the Guardian Sword Spear, when you put it in Keen Affinity, you're basically getting S scaling. It's that good. You do a ton of damage, and it's just a great versatile weapon. Throw Ice Spear on this, and you're pretty much going to be unstoppable. Kind of silently became one of my favorite weapons to use in Elden Ring. I love the versatility of the Guardian Sword Spear. Let's jump into equipment for this one. And for this, we have the Guardian Sword Spear in Keen Affinity with Ice Spear on it. Any seal will do. You only need the Staff using Magic Affinity, Spellblade Set, Magic Scorpion Charm, Ritual Swords Talisman, Shard of Alexander, Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman, Magic Tier, Faith Tier, and then for stats on this one, we have 60 Dexterity and 60 Vigor. By the way, be sure to sub if this helped. This went over talismans, buffs, and a whole bunch of meta weapons and builds in the game. As far as stats go, you're always going to go, well, most of the time you're going to go with the best stats on the weapon. However, the Ashes of War can scale differently. Keep that in mind, try out different weapons, and you will learn as you go. I could do a second video explaining stats and soft caps and all that stuff, but that would get a lot complicated, and that would probably be at least another 15-20 minute video on its own. Hopefully this helped. Be sure to sub, and thanks for watching.